Україна – це джерело безумства. Ви тільки подивіться на неї. Вже третій рік намагається дестабілізувати Захід, злочинно захищаючи своє життя від мирного російського вторгнення. І на відміну від справжніх демократичних країн, таких як Білорусь та Росія, не хочуть проводити вибори. До речі, погляньте, яка інтрига. Ніколи не знаєш, з яким відсотком переможе чинний лідер. Тим часом в Україні щоразу обирають нового президента. Ну, справжня диктатура. Невже активна фаза війни, щоденні обстріли цивільних об'єктів, мільйони людей у вигнанні та на окупованих територіях – це вагома причина, щоб не проводити вибори? Які так хоче Путін. Бо що може бути кращим за розкол суспільства, хаос та зруйновану єдність в країні, що бореться за своє існування? Але ж ні, підступна Україна не хоче підкорятися інтересам свого ворога. Ну, справжнє безумство.
It's very complicated and it's difficult to resolve, but he definitely wants peace. If we move forward to potentially this peace summit with the four groups, as you say, how are you going to feel sitting opposite Vladimir Putin at a negotiating table? Do you think you can do that, given how you feel about him?
Якщо це буде єдина конференція,
If that is the only setup in which we can bring peace to the citizens of Ukraine and not lose people, definitely we will go for this setup, for the meeting with these four participants. What does it matter what is my attitude to him? I will not be kind to him, and I believe that I consider him an enemy. And to be honest, I believe he considers me an enemy as well. That's it.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the channel. I am Brian Lusk. Thank you for joining me this evening. I see you've already got a few people on, so absolutely pipe in. Let me know you're here and how you're doing tonight this evening. I'd love to see it. That was President Zelensky talking to Piers Morgan about his attitude towards Vladimir Putin and having to sit at the same negotiating table. He said that he is willing, and if that's the only way to get it done, but he's still an enemy. Certainly doesn't is certainly understandable in all respects. But even some of the right-wing outlets have been getting much more favorable to Zelensky in the recent days here. We'll look at, for instance, this one. The source is Jake Bro, but he's is actually referring to a Fox News interview here. It's about a minute and a half long. Let's go ahead and watch it real fast.
Russia's unprovoked war of aggression in Ukraine continues to rage. Many are dying, infrastructure dying, but with President Trump now in office, all parties now seem to agree it is time for the violence to end. My fear for Ukraine, for your country, and you have fought valiantly, and I'm no fan of Vladimir Putin. I think he's evil, a murderer. I think all of this was unnecessary. All of it could have been negotiated from the beginning, but we are where we are, and I would like Ukraine to remain a country and not have all of its infrastructure destroyed in all of this. The president did say about Vladimir Putin, he said the following, that their economy is failing. He said, settle this, stop this ridiculous war. It's only going to get worse. If we don't make a deal in soon, I'll have no other choice but to put high levels of tariffs, taxes, and sanctions on anything being sold by Russia to the U.S. and other participating countries. Let's get this war, which never should have started, if I were president, over with, make a deal, no more lives should be lost. And I hope President Trump can assist with Vladimir Putin. Not a fan of him. I think he never should have invaded Ukraine to begin with. I think your people have fought valiantly, but I am
That's quite the tone change for Fox News. So, if nothing else, the direction of the dialogue has changed quite a bit in just the last couple of weeks. I'll let you decide exactly what may have changed in that time frame, though it should be fairly obvious in the U.S. Hi, Lucille and Jerry. Glad to have you both on board. Always good to see you this evening. Let's go ahead and continue on with the saga of the cut underwater cable. And this cargo ship, you can see the anchor is damaged heavily, but my understanding is that they've actually released the Vizin as saying that the actual anchor that was involved was lost. I don't know. The details seem a little bit sketchy right now. But the latest information is that they claim that they lost their anchor due to the waves, and it's a Chinese-owned vessel. Now that puts China right in the square in the sights of the entire European Union. That's not a good move for China, considering the European Union is one of their major markets for their goods and material. So, what's this going to mean in the long run? Well, I can't speak to that yet either, because that's going to be changing a whole lot. So that's an interesting little adjustment on how things are going there, with China being indirectly involved. But as we all know, anything that says bears the Chinese ownership, it reports directly to the Chinese government. And that's going to be challenging for the Chinese to explain away. We'll see. One of the biggest pieces of news to come out, though, was that Western weapons were now authorized for deep strikes into Russia. Let me get this pulled back so you can see the whole title. There we go. This appears to be new information as far as that goes in the last week or so. That said, the U.S. and other Western nations have not provided extremely long-range weapons. At this point in time, Ukraine is basically stuck using their own developed missiles and drones to strike deep into Russian territory. This just takes some of the handcuffs off. So if they decide to get a little bit of creativity going on with how they're going to use, say, their HIMARS launchers, running them up much closer to the front lines, they can now strike deeper into Russian territory with those missiles and weapons. In addition, and I'm going to address this in a bit here, Mirage fighters and more F-16s have shown up. If they can now use Western weapons to strike deep into Russia, those airborne weapons could be the vessel that they use for it. That gives a lot of options that they didn't have before. We'll just have to see how it pans out. I'm going to briefly take a dive back into a 2022 article from the RAND Corporation talking about the whole biolabs thing. It's always kind of sit a little bit bad with me that the initial claims were there's no biolabs in Russia. And the more I looked at it, I realized they said, no, there's no biological weapons labs in Ukraine that the U.S. is sponsoring. And this addresses that piece there. And there's a couple of paragraphs I can quickly go through here. In March, Russia's ambassador to the United Nations called for a meeting of the UN Security Council to air its false allegations about Ukrainian laboratories developing biological weapons with U.S. support. Their accusations relate to real laboratories, ones that were performing epidemiological surveillance around the country in Eastern Europe and the Caucasus, and doing so transparently and in collaboration with neighboring countries and international partners, such as the World Health Organization and the World Organization for Animal Health. What the ambassador failed to mention was that Russian scientists visited these same laboratories in the past and never noted anything like Russian officials now claim. Moreover, the United States had been collaborating with Russia in the same way, providing similar assistance to Russia to refocus the activities of former Soviet biological weapons laboratories until Russia pulled out of the program in 2014, the same year it invaded Crimea. Even Russian sources indicate that the whole biolab thing is false. I'm going to post the RAND article here for you to observe, to look at. RAND Corporation does have some pretty deep ties to some pretty shady characters, but at this point, this information matches the other sources I have managed to dig up so far. So let's go ahead and continue on to the news out of Ukraine itself for a bit. There's been a lot of stuff going on in the last 24 hours, so we're kind of catching up on things over the last 2 weeks, plus some exciting things going on now. Now, this is an interesting piece of news from almost a week and a half ago. The armed forces of Ukraine were the first in the world to shoot down a cruise missile using a modified, outdated Hydra 70 rocket. The crew of one of the boats of the naval forces of the armed forces of Ukraine destroyed an enemy Kh-59 missile, which the Russians launched from an RF Su-57 aircraft and aimed at the civilian infrastructure of the Pivdeny seaport. The cost of one such Hydra missile is about $40,000. For comparison, the cost of a missile for the same NASAMS, or an anti-aircraft missile for the F-16, is more than $1 million, and a missile for the Patriot is around $3 million. Now, Hydra rockets were unguided rockets. They've been in use since just shortly after World War II. These are not spring chickens. They've been in more wars than I'm not going to continue with that comparison. They have been to a lot of wars, and they were simple unguided rockets. They've had some modifications done and other systems added around them to make them more effective and able to do things that they were never designed to do in the first place. But these were unguided rockets. These were not intended to become anti-cruise missile weapons. So to effectively shoot one down with a $40,000 Hydra rocket instead of a $1 million missile is tremendous news. We'll have to watch this for further developments. A drone attack in Kharkiv partially destroyed Baraboshovo market, one of the largest markets in Ukraine and Europe, according to Anton Herashchenko, with nobody hurt but with sizable economic damage. This is basically another civilian target in the purest of senses. This is not a place where Ukraine is like running its major economy through. It's not something that will damage Ukraine's economy in the long run. But the terror to the civilians involved is immense. Due to the war in Ukraine, U.S. companies now have the highest prices for weapons production in the last 50 years. And this is spot on. I mean, the fact is that there is so much demand for Western weapons, for the U.S. to provide weapons, because our 40-year-old gear is kicking Russia's best clean off the battlefield. In fact, I don't have it in today's video, but the people who track the losses of tanks have noted there have been 0 T-90 tanks, the latest and most modern of Russia's tanks, that were lost in the last month. 0, which indicates that 0 are likely even on the battlefield at this point. Such has been the attrition of Russia's ability to send tanks to the front. There's a lot of other factors involved there, and I'm not saying that Russia is out of T-90s. It just indicates that there are far, far, far fewer of them being used in far less risky roles than they were earlier in the war. Interesting commentary from the Ukrainian foreign minister. They noted that there is the potential for purchasing LNG gas from the United States, and that Ukraine has immense underground gas storage facilities that would be very hard for Russia to destroy. So this seems like a match made in heaven, NC stated. Ukraine can provide its storage facilities for U.S. gas. Or, in other words, drill, baby, drill, because the Russians are using their gas and oil reserves in order to be able to continue to prosecute this war. The destruction of many of the refineries is causing Russia no end of heartache. And if the price of oil can be dropped just to about $45 Russia can't even pump the oil and provide it to the world markets at even anything close to a profit. There's been some announcements of some restructuring of Ukrainian armed forces. The leadership of the Azov Battalion and the 3rd Assault Brigade, both very experienced units, will be formed into the backbone of 2 new corps in the Ukrainian army. This restructuring will create, quote, tactical units, reinforcing frontline sectors with 12 to 15,000 soldiers, heavy weapons, artillery, and support units. You see, this is important because up till this point, at least in the most recent rounds of recruitment, Ukraine has been taking the soldiers and forming them into new units. So everybody from the top to the bottom is new. They train together, they learn together, and then they go and fight together. But there's no experience going in with these units at the same time. By taking these veteran units and using them as the leadership of 2 new, much larger units, they can spread that knowledge around and make it so that their new soldiers will be able to more effectively work in the battlefield. This is tremendous news from Ukraine. Now, I've got some bits about things that the U.S. is saying. One of the things that Zelensky has forwarded, not expecting it to be actually carried out from everything I've seen, is this idea that if Ukraine is not going to be allowed in NATO, they need to have their nuclear weapons back. Now, those nuclear weapons were given to Russia, not to the U.S., so the U.S. doesn't have a stockpile of Russian nuclear weapons or nuclear delivery systems to give to Ukraine. But there's no reason Ukraine can't restart their own nuclear production facilities and program. It would not take them long to take the current knowledge of nuclear weapons and re-implement that into their own brand of nuclear weapons. So the U.S. has basically said, no, this isn't going to happen. It's between small and zero. Now, if it's between small and zero, it is not, in fact, zero, and therefore it is possible. There was another prisoner exchange. 150 Ukrainian POWs returned from Russian captivity just yesterday. So that's even more good news for Ukraine. All right, let's go ahead and move over to the news out of Russia for a bit here. From January 27th, which is about a week and a half ago, a tsunami of bankruptcies is crashing down on Russia, threatening to shake the economy to its core, according to a Kremlin-linked analytical center headed by the brother of Defense Minister Belousov. This is seriously interesting from a variety of perspectives. To even have a Kremlin-linked group even say this out loud is big. And on top of that, the fact that they are willing to say it out loud means the problem is much bigger than they're willing to state. Sanctions and sky-high interest rates have pushed Putin's economy to the brink of collapse. 1 in 5 manufacturers, coal companies, hundreds of shopping malls, transportation firms, airlines, and IT companies face the threat of bankruptcy. The situation on the front lines for Russia is getting very, shall we say, intense. They're having so much trouble getting their trucks to deliver material that they're now issuing donkeys. And I saw video of horses being used. This is going back to quite classic World War I era methods of delivering arms and equipment. So yes, they're actually giving donkeys to frontline units now. Hi, Ozzy. Glad to have you on board, as always. Always glad to see your smiling face down there. So, Oreshnik, let's talk about it briefly for just a moment or two. Russia is reported to have launched another ballistic missile. Now, the theory, at least so far, is that it was another Oreshnik. But what is not theory is that what was launched fell again on Russian territory, not on Ukraine. So it exploded on Russian soil, and there's no further information at this point in time. The armed forces of Ukraine struck the Primorsko-Akhtarsk airfield in Russia's Krasnodar Krai. This is one of their major bases for drones and launching other similar missions with drones and that type of munitions. We're still waiting on a damage report on what was hit. This actually came out today. But that still means that Ukraine is starting to be able to make the most of the weapons and equipment that they have. The most interesting thing, is the fact that Russian air defense is so incapable of dealing with the situation as it is. In Velika Novosilka, the enemy is using the local population as human shields, according to Dmitry at War Translated. Russians are employing their, quote, favorite tactic while moving through populated areas. They take civilians with them, putting their lives at risk, knowing they won't be fired upon in such circumstances. No surprise there, to me at least. But 67% of Russians still support the war in Ukraine. And you can do the numbers yourself. You can see there, Dmitry posted it was 98 million people supporting the war. Yeah. Volgograd, Russia, also received drones, although if you look at this, this is not typical to see. They say this is their air defense going out. So clearly something happened to Volgograd. We don't have any reports on what just yet. You may have noted that I've previously mentioned that the Russians had pulled out of Syria. And the theory that people were going on was that Libya might take them in. But the ships that were taking on equipment from Syria have now turned on their ADS-B transmitters. I think that's the right term. And are heading to Kaliningrad and St. Petersburg, respectively, not stopping in Libya. Just a more confirmation, this time from the Russian State Duma, that donkeys and other animals are now on the front lines. And this is, quote, normal practice due to the great difficulties in delivering ammunition and food to the front lines. Interestingly enough, according to a Ukrainian partisan group working behind enemy lines, Russian military units are losing access to their Starlink satellite internet across Russian-occupied territories in Ukraine, with the systems requiring verification for access to be restored. Now, there is a comment just below that says that they don't require verification. However, when a new update does occur, it will ask for a two-step verification, which will shut down the terminal until done. In other words, some way to have the owner report that they want the terminal to remain active and that they are contactable, like, I don't know, two-factor authentication type thing. So since the frontline units are typically not providing these for themselves, whoever activates them is probably who has to go through all that authentication. And how they're going to do that when they don't have access to the terminal, we'll see. Now, interestingly enough, there is apparently, quote, panic in the Kremlin due to President Trump's soaring popularity among Russians. While the policies of the previous administration easily created an enemy image for the average Russian citizen in terms of values, now Trump as president meets the demands of Russian citizens more than Putin himself. A family man with a large open family, the data on which is not classified by special services. He became a billionaire before he came to power, definitely not the situation for Vladimir Putin. A strong advocate for U.S. citizens on issues of migrant crime and relations with their countries of origin. For where they reference the situation with Colombia, which you may not know about, but here's the quick 10-cent tour. When Donald Trump started to say, we're going to send these illegal immigrants back to their home countries, Colombia actually refused 2 flights of immigrants. And Donald Trump said, okay, you're going to take them back, or you're going to get slapped with some tariffs so hard you won't be able to sell a thing in the U.S. to save your life. Now, Colombia provides, I believe it's cut flowers, and there was one other thing. I don't think it was oil, but it's something. And it's not just, drugs. But they provide 2 legitimate products that come into the U.S. market. For us, it's like a sliver of a percentage point of what comes in. For them, it's like 30% of their economy. So when Trump said, okay, we'll just put tariffs on all your stuff, they went, took, I believe it was less than an hour. In fact, as I recall, it was less than 30 minutes for the Colombian president to say, okay, time out. I'll just send my presidential plane to pick up those illegal immigrants, and we'll get that taken care of. And the whole thing was over in less than an hour. So they think that this looks good for the U.S. from the Russian perspective. I'm actually not surprised. They promotes tax cuts. Trump promotes tax cuts for his own citizens and businesses while imposing tariffs and duties on foreign countries. U.S. domestic policy now absolutely coincides with the values that the Kremlin used to make, quote, unique for Russians. A strict command has been given to all media to stop any material on the positive aspects of Trump's domestic policy. All info provocations to focus only to the growth of U.S. domestic, national, and class tensions. Basically, they're saying that Donald Trump is a better Vladimir Putin than Vladimir Putin is. And therefore, if they market or mention Donald Trump in that light, it actually makes him more popular with Russians. This is not my perspective, it is Russia's perspective. The Russian army has suffered exceptionally high casualties in Ukraine due to what one blogger calls assault for the sake of assaults. Performative attacks carried out principally to allow local commanders to inform their superiors that they have complied with orders. This is one of the things that sets the U.S. as a military apart from the Russian military. That the U.S. has commanders that are expected to think about what's going on and not blindly assault just because they were told that that is their task. They're to plan, coordinate, and figure out the best way to take that hill or whatever. Whereas Russians are expected to follow orders to the letter. Not to be intelligent, not to be smart, not to look for the right way to do it, but to just do what they're told to do. The best Russian commanders are the ones that can successfully look past those orders, get the necessary tasks done, while not having to do it as a blind assault for the sake of an assault. There's more fires raging on Russian oil and gas facilities in Volgograd and Astrakhan. There's been a lot more attacks since this February 2nd post, and there's just too many to just go through. It's nuts. From Crimean Wind, the Albash Neft oil depot in Krasnodar region of the Russian Federation was attacked by a missile, not a drone, as the authorities claim. Now let's go ahead and just quickly take a look at this video. That's just the burning of the facility itself. You can see at least a couple of tanks involved. And let's take a look at this one. This is the one they're claiming you can see the missile coming in. And it did look like it had something burning off the back end, like an engine, like a jet engine. And it was moving a lot faster than the typical Ukrainian drone, which tends to look more like a small airplane, a small light airplane. So interesting to see, and I'd love to know what kind of missile or drone was used on this one. It's just interesting to see. And I already mentioned this about Krasnodar Krai, their drone launch site. This one claims that it went up into flames, but again, we don't have a good damage report on that yet. I'm going to briefly drop into the idea of disinformation. This thread here by a QAnon promoter, according to this poster, has over 10 million views. That part is true. And a huge engagement with no community note at that point in time. It's been noted since then. But it's not true. You see, the video purports to be from the E! News organization and is designed to look like it, and claims that Ben Stiller, as well as many other celebrities, were paid millions by USAID to go and get these photo ops with Zelensky. Ben Stiller himself has stated that he paid for this trip out of his own pocket. He went as a volunteer, not as a paid individual, and that this is purely rumor mill material. Now, others mentioned that cash is fungible, so if he received funds through some other method, it could easily be viewed as being for this task. That means they're stretching. They're really trying to make it look this way. In fact, this particular bit about this video, it's pretty hilarious. The Russians actually called out their own disinformation, which was being presented as fact by the West. The Russian media organization, Rybar, this news turned out to be fake. This was largely facilitated by Elon Musk, who reposted the news on his X account as part of a personal media campaign criticizing USAID. Donald Trump Jr. acted similarly. In this case, this is a good example of information warfare. The authors caught on to the current trends in the Western media landscape, meaning specifically the Doge audit or examination of the activities of the U.S. Agency for International Development, and successfully played on the theme of the senseless pouring into Ukraine grant eaters. So this is the disinformation we have to watch for on a regular basis. Or as this picture shows, all these Russian soldiers doing common memes, effectively, statements that people that are against Ukraine might use. And the same thing happening with these Chinese soldiers using these same things, supporting the same type of commentary. In that same vein, German authorities revealed that hundreds of cars in Germany were sabotaged by a group of 3 men who operated for the Russian state. After damaging the cars, they left messages pointing at the Green Party. So again, this is trying to gin up this division so that the pro-Russian AfD might pick up that extra support. It's just Russian disinformation being Russian disinformation. Now, I have mentioned before that calling things Russian disinformation is lazy until you really are looking at Russian disinformation. And that's what we're looking at here. They're even admitting that they tried to pull that off. This is old refineries going up in smoke. But the reason I brought this one up is I mentioned the drones earlier. This is more of a typical Ukrainian drone right here. A small light aircraft with a bomb strapped to the bottom. This one happened to crash last year, April 2024, yes. And this is the type of drone they typically are sending into the field. They're now dropping effectively 250 kilogram bombs, the Fab 250s, which is a Russian design bomb, onto these locations like this oil pumping station on the Druzhba pipeline. So interesting to see this going on, and I thought you'd find that as just an interesting aside there. Let's go ahead and move on to the international front. Now, last time we talked about Israel, and all of a sudden these cargo airplanes flying down to Israel, then up to Poland. Israel has started supplying Ukraine with Soviet and Russian-made weapons captured in Lebanon, according to The Telegraph. About 60% of the weapons captured by Israel during the fight against Hezbollah were made in Russia, and in the USSR and Russia. So that's a confirmation of what we theorized before. Now, other sources, according to this case Axios, state that Israel is supplying Ukraine with its old Patriot surface-to-air missile systems as well. Again, good news for Ukraine if true. I've not seen additional Patriots, but it could be the case. Now, this is going back to January 28th, and this is from President Zelensky here for the information of the current Prime Minister of Slovakia. I think I've got this later, so I'll talk about that when I get to that point. A few days ago, President Trump made a strong decision that can significantly increase the export of American LNG, especially to Europe. That's liquid natural gas. This is exactly what is needed for security and stability, more energy resources from partners for Europe. American LNG must be paid for with money. But Russian gas comes at a cost not only of money, but of independence and sovereignty. Many in Europe have already gone through this and chosen to preserve their independence and sovereignty. But not Mr. Fico. He chooses Moscow over America and other partners who can supply his country with gas on commercial terms. This is his mistake. Everyone in Europe must think long term and foster relationships that strengthen our nations. Now, I'm just going to see if I can quickly find it here. Yes, here it is. Russian gas is now flowing to Slovakia through Turk Stream, with delivery set to double from April, according to the SPP chief, Wojtek French. The Gazprom contract will run until 2034, and Slovakia states, we are not terminating it. This came up on January 29th from Drew Pavlo, and I'm going to summarize what I know about it. A van full of explosives was discovered by the Australian police bound for Sydney and was going to be parked outside a synagogue loaded with enough explosives to create a blast diameter of 40 meters, which would be about 120 feet. This is major and indicates that the terrorists are still quite keen to attack soft targets in the Western nations. This could have been the worst terrorist attack in quite some time. Now, I don't typically reference David here as a resource because he is a partisan's partisan in the sense that he is 100% on Ukraine's side in all respects, and he will often minimize negative news and emphasize positive news. However, this addresses something that is turned out to be true. And he talks about the Biden admin playing games with Ukraine aid, and Zelensky himself has confirmed that in many cases the aid didn't show up in the quantities that were promised, often around half of what was promised. The U.S. never ran out of funding during the budget talks. The Republicans never blocked anything. There was plenty of money in the accounts, and there was lots of ammo being made. Biden redirected the ammo to the Israeli Defense Forces and stated it was due to the Republicans. Biden didn't use Lend-Lease, the executive drawdown authority, and he had about $6 billion that he was just sitting on, waiting for some unknown reasons. Now, why did he do this? I don't know, and I'm just going to state that straight up. But it's clear, at least as we've seen the information come out in recent days, that there were forces in the Biden administration that did not want Ukraine to win. And those forces have been stymied or blocked by the start of the Trump administration. What's Trump going to do? I don't know. We'll just have to find out over time. Ozzy states the Libya port was controlled by the pro-Russia faction and does not have the facilities to cope with ongoing presence of large ships. That would explain why those two ships went back to Russia instead of stopping at Libya. Interesting. Thank you, Ozzy. Already talked about not covering Donald Trump. Azerbaijan has notified Russia about the termination of the activities of its Development Cooperation Agency. And in fact, it was operating without proper registration anyway, so they have taken the building of the Russian house in Baku. This really indicates that Azerbaijan, the source of that airplane that was shot down by Russia, is now very much not on Russia's side at the moment. I don't know how long it'll last, but interesting. Azerbaijan plans to take Russia to international court over that plane crash, with Russia trying to cover up the incident and push blame towards the crew to perhaps attempt to create a Malaysian Boeing 2 situation, it says. So we've got a lot of things going on there that are kind of Russia shooting themselves in the foot. Kellogg, who's the special envoy to Ukraine, has said that President Trump will present the strategy to end the war himself, but it won't happen next week. That was kind of reported for a bit, but we're watching how things are going on this. There are preparations for a meeting between Putin and Trump, which are, quote, at an advanced stage, according to Russia, with no promises, but possibly in February or March. Whereas Peskov, who likes to, shall we say, enjoy a liquid lunch to get through his day, there are contacts between Russia and the United States between individual agencies, and they have intensified recently. Very much a weird way of stating it. Positive interactions, negative interactions, demands, concessions. Of course, Peskov's not going to say, because if it's not positive for Russia, because that's just not going to be good for him to say it out loud. So I would say this is a lot more neutral or negative for Russia on these contacts. Some of that could be me just hoping, but I would expect if they were positive for Russia that Peskov would have spilled the beans. The Russian Foreign Ministry said they're ready for tough bargaining with the U.S. president. They emphasized that negotiations must consider realities on the ground and Russia's national interests as defined by history and geography. Yeah, always that's been their line for quite some time. On the other hand, Ukraine has seen a marked improvement on the accuracy of Russia's North Korean missiles, so something's changed. Before they were getting 1 to 3 kilometers of accuracy as their circular error probability. Now it's down to 50 to 100 meters. They don't know exactly why, but clearly North Korea is learning. French Mirage fighter jets have finally arrived in Ukraine. These ones are actually outfitted with ground attack munitions and Scalper Storm Shadow cruise missiles. Indicating their intended role is to directly attack ground targets, not necessarily air to air. These are older 4th generation fighters. They have been upgraded to do so. But to be honest, they're replacing old MiGs and Sus. They're not going to be, these are going to be upgrades for the Ukrainian pilots. Still only, as I understand it, 3 have arrived so far, but more will be coming shortly. In fact, here it is. 3 aircraft equipped with Scalp cruise missiles and AASM bombs. So there we go. And of course, the Ukrainian pilots receive training in them. This would be a lot more in line with what they have got already. So absolutely, they should be able to make good use of these already. They also received some additional F-16 fighter jets from the Netherlands, though I note that there's a comment down here saying Denmark also sent F-16s. So we're getting a lot more aircraft for Ukraine. Clearly, they're able to make the most of these aircraft. Not just they're not just letting them sit idle or using them wrong. So this is good news for Ukraine. Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia will disconnect from the Russian power grid over this weekend. According to Lithuania's energy minister, this step will prevent Russia from using the power grid as a tool for geopolitical influence. And they do. They'll threaten to cut you off if you don't do what they want. And now these countries are basically saying, ha, get lost, Russia. The UK Foreign Secretary showed up in Ukraine and announced an additional £55 million aid package. That'd be around, I'm just going from memory here, around 60-some million US. That includes support for grain exports, energy projects, business recovery, and community services. This is obviously not direct military aid, but anything that keeps the Ukrainian economy going is good news for Ukraine. Even Azerbaijan has allocated $1 million in humanitarian aid, which includes purchasing and delivering electrical equipment to Ukraine. Everybody's getting on board now, and I think we're starting to see the nations of the world start to pick sides in serious ways. On the other hand, we see Pope Francis on a conference call with 250 young Ukrainians from Kyiv and other cities in Europe, and urging Ukrainian youth to forgive their enemies and resist the instinct to strike back in war. I don't think he has to worry about the Ukrainians in this regard. Just saying. Already mentioned that earlier. The Wall Street Journal has shown new satellite images of the Russian naval base in the Abkhazian port of Ochumchira in the Black Sea. They're dredging it out. They're making it good enough to get some of their deeper vessels in there. This might be the new headquarters for the Black Sea Fleet. Either way, Russia wants it to be far enough away from Ukraine that it won't be as easy to strike. However, this would put a fairly significant naval base on Georgian territory. That said, Georgia, the situation over in Georgia is very volatile right now. The indications I'm seeing is that the Georgian Dream Party, which is the pro-Russian Kremlin-backed political party that basically stuffed the ballot boxes, literally, there are videos of people literally stuffing hundreds of ballots into the box in Georgia. The Russians are backing that party, and it really sounds like they've managed to crack down on the protests. I don't have the latest information from Georgia, but I have been seeing indications that things are pretty much winding down. I will try and follow up on that and get more for you later. If you've been following the whole situation with the Panama Canal, with the U.S. basically saying we want it back if you're going to let China in, Panama blinked. They've now withdrawn from China's Belt and Road Initiative, and the further information will be coming out soon. Now, if you know anything about the Belt and Road Initiative, I've managed to get enough information in the recent years to know that it is basically a soft power play by China to basically take over vital infrastructure and ports and facilities and economic drivers in various countries, usually by providing unfavorable loans with, shall we say, oversized promises for what they will deliver for growth for the country. And then when the country is not able to pay back the loan, why they just say, well, we'll just generously take the property that we built. That's the Belt and Road Initiative, and that gives China bases and ports all over the world as they've been able to build things like that. Denmark is going to start inspecting the Shadow Fleet tankers as they are moving through the sea up there. This is after quite a few of those undersea cables have been severed. So finally, this free passage treaty from 1857 is going to get some more inspections involved. So that's a change there that Russia's going to have to deal with. Now, moving out of Ukraine for just a moment, I don't want to touch on this one for too long. Donald Trump announced that the U.S., once Israel has finished clearing the Palestinians out of Gaza, that the U.S. will take over and rebuild Gaza into basically the Riviera, the beachfront property, and make it the jewel of the area. Stating we will take it, we will own it and be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons on the site. I don't know how I feel about this at this point in time. I don't feel right about it, but I can't put my finger on exactly what bothers me the most. For one thing, for somebody who's promised not to get us into more foreign wars, putting a bunch of our men and equipment right there where the Palestinians have easy access to bomb and rocket it, and Iran has an easy target to hit, not the smartest thing I've heard this week. We'll just put it that way. Senator Fetterman stated it's a provocative part of the conversation, but it's part of the conversation, and that's where we are. The Palestinians have refused, or they've been unwilling, to deliver a government that provided security and economic development for themselves. They allowed 10/7 or October 7th to occur, and now Gaza has to be rebuilt. Where are the people going to live? Where are they going to go? So it's part of a conversation with where they're at right now. So I don't know. My gut feel tells me bad things, but I could be entirely wrong on this, and it's something we're just going to have to watch. At least I'm going to have to watch to see what the real plan is going to be. Is this one of Donald Trump's famous negotiating points to start from, or is this actually what he wants to do? I mean, he is a real estate developer after all. Let's go ahead and move on to the front lines. There has not been a ton of changes over the last few days. I'm going to get into what's going on in Kursk in just a moment here. To put it simply here, the Ukrainians have pushed down to Ulanok here, and I'll try and get some better maps for you in that point. There's been a lot of activity. The Russians have one version of the story, the Ukrainians have another. Other than that, no changes in the Kharkiv region, no changes in this northeast corner here. About the only changes have been right in this area here where the Russians managed to push into Andriivka, but this looks like a very fragile situation here. The overall plan, to me at least, clearly indicates they want to cut this entire road here, isolate Dashne entirely, and possibly take Konstantinopol and Ulakli with minimal amount of force, cutting off this entire area and absorbing that part of the front lines. That's tactically sound for Russia, and it's a challenge for Ukraine. From War Gonzo, the frontline report as of last night, effectively. Zaporizhia front, no major changes. Donetsk, they've got the Russians making some small gains. Chasiv Yar, they say they've got more tactical successes, but it never shows up on the map. Kursk region, as of this point, no significant changes. But let's take a look at the Kursk region in just a moment here. Here's the bit about Dvorchna, where the Russians have managed to make a significant bridgehead near Novomilsk. No other confirmation, but we'll be watching that area as well. Let's go ahead and dive into Kursk, and I've got this stuff kind of put together in weird ways here. Let's just roll on through. Kursk official revealed the damage figures for the Kursk region. So we're not talking about the actual incursion, additional counteroffensive at this point. But the regional minister said that the damage from the invasion amounted to 750 billion rubles, or about 7.6 billion US dollars, and that's no less than 21% of the region's territory affected by the fighting. It's unusual for the Kremlin to reveal real figures, and the official was reprimanded. So we're going to have to watch that one with some interest as well. Now let's get into the counteroffensive. I'm going to start with a high level here. So far, the information has been jumbled, but there is a report that due to weather conditions being rough for Russian drone operators, the Ukrainians made a major offensive of using about 400 troops and about 50 pieces of armored equipment. Moving to the southeast from, the name of the town just went out of my head. Hang on a second. Makhnovka. So southeast from Makhnovka there. The reports have been that the Ukrainians managed to break through their lines and consolidate their positions in Ulanok, with the 810th having received an order to protect the battalion commander, not the front lines. They're, quote, panicking in the Kursk region due to the Ukrainian counteroffensive. The Russians even said they have entered the town of Fanasivka, which would be actually before they got to Ulanok. And that they're also reporting that the Russians have lost Cherkasskaya Konopelka. Now, other sources have said that the Ukrainians bypassed this town, but they're so obviously fog of war right now. We don't have absolutely positively reliable information. Now, the Russians are reporting that the Ukrainians are attacking in several different directions with unclear outcomes. This is pretty crazy stuff. Now, the Russians are saying they may actually lose 2 to 3 regiments prior to sundown. And this, according to David, which I mentioned before, is kind of a big partisan in that regard. He says this could be the Russians' largest loss of troops of the war. Now, I take this information with a grain of salt. However, he has been particularly accurate lately, which is why I'm reporting it here. Therefore, I advise to take this with a grain of salt as well and just hold it as interesting information. In that same vein, he did post that the line has been broken with Ukrainian forces pushing on through into Ulanok. This is well confirmed information at this point. I've got it from multiple sources with multiple information. The question at this point is whether Ukraine captured all of Ulanok or if they only established a bridgehead inside the town. The Russians are reporting that rare Western donated tanks and armored recovery vehicles are on the Kursk region in this new offensive, and they believe this could indicate that the commitment could be bigger than expected for this particular push. However, there are some people that just cannot resist opening their mouths. In particular, we've just kind of looking really fast at, and this really should be later, but I'm going to address this right now since it's in front of me. Ben, why don't you liberate the regions yourselves, people of Kursk? Well, maybe it's because they don't have great leadership like that. Zelensky stated that the Russian armed forces will not be able to push the Ukrainians out of the Kursk region, with the Russians noted as suffering heavy losses. We don't have good information on Ukrainian losses in the area, so it's something that we have to take with a little bit of a concern that we'll have to kind of watch over time. That said, there's been absolutely no indications that the Ukrainians have lost sufficient to cause this to be a problematic area for them. In fact, they seem to be trading in the 3 to 8 to 1 range, depending on the moment in time that you're looking at. The Romanov Russian mill blogger has updated their map of the Kursk region, which pretty much matches what what Null Reports is stating. Again, this is a very flexible situation that is very dynamic at this point in time. You can take a look at this map if you would like. Lots to be watching out for. The Null Reports also reports that Ukrainian forces have entered Kolmokov and Cherkashskaya, Konopelka, and Fanasivka. This is an early report on that whole situation. Whereas Baza reports, now Baza is a Russian news organization, so you got to understand that as well. They're now reporting that the situation has been put under control. It is, quote, difficult, but that the Ukrainians have lost 6 tanks, 3 mine-clearing vehicles, 3 infantry fighting vehicles, and 14 armored combat vehicles. 6 plus 9, 12, 26 vehicles out of a reported 40. That would indicate that the Russians believe that they have absolutely murdered the entire force, basically the entire effective combat forces that Ukraine has put into this counteroffensive. I, as always, take Russian statements on this with not only a grain of salt, but an entire truckload, because I always end up having to, when I trust a Russian source like this, I end up having to eat my words shortly after. But suffice to say, it is at least known that the Ukrainians have entered Ulanok and potentially either captured or significant portions or the entire town. And in this, just kind of a quick picture here, 21 Russian soldiers did surrender to the Ukrainian armed forces in Kursk. This seems to be a pattern that I'm seeing on a regular basis these days. Now, Wargonzo also kind of basically said the situation of this large-scale counterattack remains tense but under control, and that he's claiming that the Ukrainians were stopped at Ulanok. So take your pick on which perspective you want to believe. At this point in time, I can only provide the best information available, and my belief is that the Ukrainians have managed to advance to Ulanok and potentially take part of the town. It's just something to keep in mind. Other maps are also confirming the basic information that we've just addressed here. Overall, though, the Russians are going to claim they thwarted it, and then in 3 days, we'll be talking about another town farther down the road that the Russians have successfully stopped the Ukrainians at. We're just going to have to watch. We'll see what happens in a few days. Whereas the 6-month assessment from the Institute for the Study of War on the Kursk region incursion, I'm just going to read you the executive summary here. A small group of Ukrainian troops in Kursk Oblast have complicated the Russian military's efforts to advance in Ukraine over the last 6 months. Roughly a division's worth of Ukrainian troops have undermined the Russian military's ability to launch or renew offensive operations in the lower priority areas of the front line, and to reinforce priority efforts with elite airborne and VDV and naval infantry units. The Ukrainian incursion in Kursk Oblast is a partial proof of concept of how limited Ukrainian battlefield activity that leverages vulnerabilities in Russia's war-fighting capabilities and that integrates technological adaptations with mechanized maneuver can have theater-wide impacts on operations. It showed that surprise is still possible even in a partially transparent battlefield, and that rapid maneuver is possible under the right conditions. The war in Ukraine, in other words, is not permanently stalemated. Either side can potentially restore maneuver and begin to gain or regain significant territory. Russia will be able to do so if the West reduces or cuts off aid. Ukraine may be able to do so if Western support continues to empower Ukrainian innovation. And that's the long story short on what's going on in Kursk. It's pretty crazy stuff. And now I'm going to point out one thing. I just went through a whole lot of stuff about Kursk, and there's like 1 or 2 teeny tiny changes to the rest of the map. So what's going on in Kursk is literally making Russia pick the places they care about the most. And they have to prioritize those and Kursk. And they have got to move troops from the other areas that are lower priority and move them to Kursk or to these other really high priority points in order to maintain any advantage in movement or continuing to gain ground. The amount they're gaining is tiny. Shoot. Ukraine probably just reversed the last 5 days of Russian advances by their little action in Kursk. It's just how it is right now. And that's kind of the news from Ukraine. I'm going to quickly go through a couple of extra items here. This one is funny as all get out to me, just because the Russians are talking about their own grad truck blowing up with their missiles going on, and they're like, cool. I think they just like watching things blow up. I mean, honestly. And then Andrew Perpetua. I don't often reference Andrew Perpetua, but he is one of the big guys that goes through video after video after video, cataloging and classifying damaged and destroyed vehicles and giving huge tallies for them. The man's doing hard work to do this type of thing. But he basically gave a nice little eulogy for this little bulldozer. This little bulldozer right here effectively negated the impact of the Russian Air Force on the Ukrainian supply line south of Constantinople. Russians were dropping tremendous numbers of bombs in an attempt to destroy the bridges, and this little guy is out there rebuilding them and getting rid of craters. It took a solid hit from an FPV drone, but the driver wasn't there when it happened. The little guy denied the impact of the Air Force for a few $1,000s. This is why engineering fundraisers are vital. And we'll end off with this quick story here. A Russian hero, Alexander Erlik, a conscript without a driver's license, crashed into a Su-25 M3 attack aircraft and a Kamaz truck in Simferopol, occupied Crimea. The aircraft was being towed with a rigid coupling at the time. The resulting damage is 386.8 million rubles, or $4 million. That's one more aircraft out of commission, all because the Russians can't afford to train their people how to drive. And on that note, thank you very much for joining me tonight. Always glad to have you with us. Ozzy, Lucille, Jerry, thank you so much. And for those that didn't chime in, I appreciate you too. You have a great rest of your evening, and we'll see you on the next video.